promised you guys we'd be talking about them, and today's the day. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Claire. So I'm finally going to be talking about the Grisha Trilogy. This is not in order at all. Yeah, this is kind of the precursor to the very, very popular duology Six of Crows. These are by Leigh, which is, I think, how you pronounce her name. But you've probably heard, or at least have seen, Six of Crows. It's wildly popular right now, and for good reason. It's such a good duology and super well written, really interestingly plotted and written out. Extremely good. But before that, in the same universe, what started it all was this trilogy. And although I actually really liked this trilogy, and I got my mom to read it and talk to her about it recently, this first book, I almost quit after reading it. If I didn't have all of these immediately available to me, I don't think I would have continued reading after Shadow and Bone, because it was a wreck. So let's get into it. I'm gonna keep this spoiler free unless stated otherwise, and I'm gonna try to keep it all relatively brief, just give a general rundown. So what I told my mom is what I will tell all of you, and you can choose to listen or to not, do whatever you please. But I told her to skip the first book entirely, look up everything you need to know about the plot and characters and all that online on Wikipedia, and then just go straight into the second book, Siege and Storm. Because this first book is so incredibly frustrating, disappointing, and just boring above all else. I think I can get through a frustrating book. I mean, I got through Name of the Wind and Wise Man's Fear, and those books are both frustrating and 1,000 pages long. But this, above all, was just dull. So it's a super interesting world and premise. So there's a Russian vibe to this fantasy world, and it seems to take place quasi pre-World War I. You get the sense, but this is a fantasy world, but you just get the sense that guns are, and kind of newer technology is just being introduced. It's set up in this country called Ravaka, where there are these people who have powers. Basically like bending from Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's a little bit different. So some people can control various elements like fire or wind or tides. Some people can control the human body, like your heart rate or your breathing, and they can either be used as soldiers or as healers. And then some people are fabricators, and they can kind of manipulate metal and things like that. In this country, there's this thing called a fold, and it's this super dark place filled with monsters that's slowly expanding and consuming a lot of the country, and people are just really freaked out and think it's going to be the end of the world because it's literally consuming the country, and not even the Grisha, the people with powers, can stop them. There's a very super powerful Grisha called the Darkling, and his power, unlike everyone else's, is that he controls darkness, and he can use darkness as a weapon. But he's useless in the fold because everything's already dark, pitch black in the fold. And so our main girl is Elena, and her friend Mal, her childhood friend / crush Mal, are in this army. And she talks about her appearance all the time, which is part of the thing that drives me insane with this book, is that she's constantly talking about, and it's in first person. Okay, I should say these are all in first person. They're a young adult series, and they read young adult. They borderline read middle grade, except there's a lot more violence. So she's constantly talking about how ugly she thinks she is, how skinny she is, how just dull and unattractive she is, and She and her childhood crush are, and like all the people she knows have to go through the fold as soldiers because they're trying to get from one side of the country to the other where the capital is to just deliver supplies. Pretty much a death sentence every time people have to travel through the fold. And then she finds out, and this may be a spoiler, but it's within the first like 20 to 30 pages of the book, that she's like the opposite of the Darkling, where if he controls darkness, she can control light. She had no idea she was a Grisha either. And now people are looking at her as like the savior of the world because they think that she's going to be able to defeat the fold. So she gets taken off to the capital of Ravaka and meets their king and queen and is a part of the Grisha like school where they all learn to control their powers, and that's where she kind of learns about hers and all the things she can do. She kind of has a flirtation with the Darkling, and she's still kind of in love with Mal. That's basically the setup of this book. Just really odd because there's virtually no world building. And again, I was freshly right off of reading Wiseman's Fear, so maybe that's not the fairest like mindset to go into reading something like this, but there seriously was just so little to work on. I knew there must be some Russian influence because of the cover design, but other than that, there's very little to like actually clue me in the writing. It just felt very rushed and very flat. Like there just wasn't a lot there. And then the thing that also really got to me, and that my mom also complained about in the 2 books that she read, continued to take her out of the series. Not always, but there's a lot of dialogue between characters, and it's supposed to be funny, but it's extremely modern. Like modern sarcasm, modern, witty, sarcastic humor. Which is fine, except this doesn't seem like it's supposed to be taking place in modern day. There's kings and queens and like guns are like a brand new invention, and I get more of like a pre-World War I old school Russian vibe, but then there's all this extremely modern dialogue and humor throughout it, which maybe makes it more accessible to really, really young readers. But yeah, it took me out of it pretty bad. And I don't know if it's just the other books, I was getting used to it, so I kind of accepted it, but I know that was like a big issue for me in this one. Along with the world building, there's a lot of lore and kind of mythology, which again makes the series so interesting, especially when you get into the other 2 books, which are much, much better written, but it just felt very glossed over. I wasn't necessarily confused, I just felt it was poorly explained. And I got to the climax of this book, and there's this like really big emotional climactic scene, and I was just like, why is this happening? How can she do that? That doesn't make any sense. Which of course is not something you want your readers to be thinking when you get to the climax of a book. Worse than all of that is the middle. Oh, the middle lags so hard. It is so unbelievably boring. That's probably a worse crime than anything when it comes to reading for me, is like, I mean, not that I want to read bad books, but like, just don't be dull. Just don't bore me to tears, you know? It was kind of a struggle to get through this one, and it's super thin. The words are big. There's not that many pages, and it still was just like, oh, just because I didn't feel like there was any momentum behind it. And it looks really cool too. Actually, I want to show you guys the map. I opened it up and saw like a little bit of it, but isn't that so cool? Like that's the fold. It's just so beautifully presented, and there seems to be a lot of cool ideas throughout this, and I kind of felt this way about this series, that maybe the ideas and the mythology were too big and complex for this story, or for the way the story was written, because again, it's written so YA. It is a YA book. So that all being said, but the reason you should keep reading it is because Siege of Storm is so good. I have never had a turnaround in a series like this. I just read it because all the books were available to me, so I just picked it up and kept going, and I'm so glad I did because this was so much fun. So much fun. There's like constantly things going on. You go from like one adventure to the next, to the next, to the next. There's a character introduced in the second one named Nikolai, and I believe Leah is making a book like from his perspective or something like that. So yeah, Nikolai is amazing. He just brings so much needed life and momentum to the series. He and the Darkling I really, really, really like. Elena's also one of those characters where I think especially in Shadow and Bone, she gets better, but she's kind of irritating and you're forced to read from her perspective, so you're stuck in this very irritating point of view. But like I said, it gets a lot better, and there's just so many fun, exciting adventures. The mythology, I think in both are much more fleshed out, so they make it obviously a lot more interesting. And the ending of this actually shocked me, like actually shocked me. I thought it was so cinematic and sad and beautiful and something that just, I don't know, I was just not expecting it to be that both emotional and just lovely in like the saddest, most tragic kind of horrible way. It's so good. I was so excited to talk to my mom after she read it because I was just like, this book, man, this book, like, I think I actually gasped out loud towards the end of this one, which is kind of ridiculous when you're reading, but I really did. I was shocked. I was legitimately shocked. So Siege of Storm is an A+. I would say it's totally tied up there with me with her Six of Crows duology, which, granted, way more complex and interesting plot. So even though this is still like, it still reads YA, it still kind of has that dialogue issue, but it's so fun and just fantastic. I actually seriously love Siege of Storm. This one rules. What is this? Yeah, I don't love Ruin and Rising, which is the final one in the trilogy, as much as Siege of Storm. However, it is still 1,000 times better than Shadow and Bone and has a really, really interesting ending. If you guys have read this trilogy, you should let me know down below if I should have a spoiler review, like a spoiler just talk about the ending of this book. Because my mom and I talked about it for quite a while because I did not see it coming. I thought it was poetic and tragic and kind of sat with me weird and made me think, but I think in a way that's good. I don't know, it's really interesting. I like hearing people's opinions about the ending of this book because I think especially for kind of a teen YA fantasy thing, it goes to a pretty unexpected place. Shout outs to my mom for actually reading these. She's a very cultured lady and she did not have to, but I'm glad she did. Just felt like maybe it was too big and too complex for this very just like YA presentation. I actually think this would have done really, really well and would have, I mean, I think I would have preferred it better if it was just a straight up fantasy written from like a third person perspective and one that you could actually like really, really expand on and have the like freedom and the length to expand on, because there's just such interesting ideas in here that I really, really like. But if you haven't read anything from the Grisha universe yet, you should definitely start with these. Like Six of Crows is all the rage right now, but start with the Shadow and Bone trilogy, but skip Shadow and Bone because these two books are totally worth it. Super fun, lots of interesting ideas. They do set up the world that Six of Crows takes place in really nicely. You don't have to read the trilogy to read the duology by any means. You could absolutely just read the duology and never touch these and be completely fine. But I like it. These have such a like epic hero's journey feeling to them, and I'm a sucker for those. I love those, so I really liked these. I love the transformation that Elena goes through, especially from the end of Siege of Storm to the third book. I find that extremely interesting, and I love when characters go through such drastic changes, both in their personality and in their appearance. So I really like that aspect. I'm also a sucker for shipping, and I shipped Elena with the Darkling hardcore, but there's kind of a, not even a triangle, it's like a square between her and Mal and Nikolai and the Darkling, and I like seeing fan art. There's a really cool, like, fan art community out there online. That's a big thing for me. I love that kind of stuff. I hope you guys really liked these kind of spoiler-free reviews. Let me know if you want to see more like these down in the comments below. Again, if you've read these books, oh my gosh, tell me how you feel about them. So let me know in the comments below if you want me to discuss the endings of either Ruin and Rising or Siege and Storm, I guess, or Shadow and Bone, or any of them, because I would love to get into spoiler territory with any of those. Give this video a thumbs up, it really helps me out. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one or any of my other content in the future, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!